you really got to drive it home, dude. Like, we can't let them do this freely.
I'll do it. You guys heard that, all right? We're here with episode 7 of The Lock. We can't just let you do that. We just can't. You need to listen to this on Spotify and iTunes, all right? Like something like that, Key? Is that what you want me to say? He's making me say this.
Absolutely.
He's making me say this, guys. He is making me say that The Lock is available on iTunes.
If you're watching on YouTube, you're basically walking around the supermarket taking free samples repeatedly, and like the point is to get you to buy the full product. We need you over on anchor.fm/The Lock. That is where we get all our support, and that's what goes the most toward helping us get sponsored.
Exactly. That's the honest truth. And from there, you can watch it on iTunes, or listen to it rather, on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, a whole lot of other places. But also, if you guys would like to join our community, there's a Discord down below. Now, today's guest is a friend of mine who I've been waiting to have on the podcast, and I'm very happy that he said yes. MegaMogwai.
Hello, everybody. I'm Mogwai. I'm that guy who got 6-0'd by PK Sparks in the UCL back in the day. Happy to be here. Talk about strategy and stuff. Obviously qualified for it.
So, talk a little bit about yourself before we actually get into it. What exactly do you do now? Just for those that want to know, I think.
No, I mean, some people who have been around the Pokemon community for quite some time may recognize me. I don't know. I started as a YouTuber with Pokemon, basically. I did Pokemon Showdown Lives. I actually, watched you, Joey, back in the day, and that kind of motivated me to make my own channel and stuff. And I used to just do Showdown sessions, and then I moved on to the League format, which is what the main thing I focused on, actually. And eventually I moved on to card games, which is what I do now. I've been doing for a few years now. And I basically am a card game YouTuber streamer, I guess. I focus mainly on Magic the Gathering Arena, and I've also been a professional caster for CD Projekt Red for Gwent events as well. And Artifact too, even though that didn't turn out too well. Too soon. And I just, I guess I'm a lucky dude because I get to work on what I enjoy best, and that is just playing strategy games in general. So yeah, happy to be here, man.
No, I mean, thank you so much for coming on. Honestly, on the topic of strategy, I know Key wanted to talk about how strategy and decision making are different, and we definitely want to bring you on because as someone who has jumped from Pokemon, which is a strategy game, to card games, which I feel like have this huge comparison in terms of that. And I'll get into that real quick first before we actually keep going. But then again, I feel like I'm kind of breaking the order of what Key wanted to say. So Key, if you could stop me if you want. But
I don't. There's no specific order we really have to go into. But from what I've heard about Mogwai, because I'm not super familiar with anybody in the community in terms of taking in content from the last few years. I've been really absent in that regard. But as soon as
you mean you don't watch me, Key?
Look, I'm familiar with.
He said that very nicely. Yes, he doesn't watch.
How dare you?
From what I know about you is basically from how Gator described you in that is that you play a lot of different games and you play them well. And what I was kind of interested in is the transition from one game that's not necessarily similar to another, and how what parts of it are similar, what parts are different, and how the transition goes in terms of what carries over strategic wise.
I think one of the aspects of that I translated over from, I mean, it's important to know that I've been playing card games ever since I was a teenager, right? So it's not necessarily a new genre to me by any means, but Joey's right. There are certain similarities between the likes of Pokemon, competitive Pokemon, and card games. I think something that's very similar is the aspect of building. One of the things that I loved about Pokemon Showdown back in the day, and one of the reasons why part of me is still kind of craving it a little bit. I do want to potentially make a bit of a comeback
for sure.
I mean no promises, but I really do miss that just. You have this huge pool of different Pokemon, right? And you can just select not only select the Pokemons themselves, but also like tweak them with a specific move set and specific EV spreads and everything. And that's very similar to like deck building in a card game. It's taking, you have a pool of resources. You pull from that. You're like, okay, I need this. This works well with this. This does not work well with this. This performs well in this particular metagame because this is very popular. Like all these, different things kind of like fall together. And that is definitely something that I just think is extremely similar between, both games, despite the fact that they're like, at the same time very different, right? There's, I don't know. I guess when it comes to strategy, there's a lot to talk about. So I don't even know, where we're going to begin.
In terms of building, have you noticed how basically there's kind of a stigma in one in terms of building your own as opposed to the other? Like for Magic the Gathering, from what I know, like a lot of people stick to very similar builds just because there's a way to build certain decks that is just like far and beyond way more efficient than another. But in Pokemon, you kind of like I don't know, people kind of have a way of looking at people for not building their own. I've seen recently on Twitter. There's like
this stigma is everywhere. Like this is not exclusive to Pokemon by any means. Like I'm gonna go ahead and say it. Like there's absolutely nothing wrong with net decking, or I don't know how you would use that term in Pokemon. Stealing teams. That sounds a little bit more harsh. But basically, I used to be, like that. I'm not gonna lie. Like back in the day, I would look down upon people who would just like, even like more so in a ridiculous way, because I would actually get upset with somebody. Like I would run into somebody running my own team because I uploaded onto YouTube, and it's like, what are you doing? Copying my team that I posted on YouTube for everybody to see? But I've been there. I have a little hipster wannabe living deep inside me, and obviously, like I always want to try to be original and create stuff. And obviously, when you run into the same lineup or whatever, it can be annoying. I get it, and this applies to card games too. Like even though everybody does it, like everybody just looks at the tier list, for example, and like for Magic the Gathering, you can look at a page like MTG Goldfish. You can look at the metagame, and you can see like, oh, these are the most popular decks. So this was a Grand Prix that occurred very recently, right? These are the top 8 deck lists. Oh, I'm going to take this one. Everybody does this, right? But I don't think I think it's actually a good thing because it's a good way to learn the game faster. It's otherwise you're completely lost, and there's a stigma around it. But I think it's always gonna, because it can be annoying to run into the same strategy again and again. But it is also, it's both a good and a bad thing, and it's also, like, most importantly, never going to go away. Like there's always going to be net decking. There's always going to be people, I quote, stealing teams. I guess.
Stealing is maybe a little bit aggressive because for me, I almost always exclusively lose other people's teams unless I'm either in a draft league tournament where I'm forced to build a team, or
so you're a filthy thief. So you're saying,
hey, but I might play the team better than the people who built the team themselves, right? Because for me, my favorite aspect of Pokemon or games in this case, Pokemon, is playing, not building, right? I love using all the pieces, but I don't always love putting them together. I just want to use them, right? Like if I'll take the Pokemon Pikachu, for instance, because that's probably the most applicable one in terms of everybody knowing it. But if I want to use Pikachu, I might not know the best way to use Pikachu. But if already somebody has, they have results with Pikachu, I'm like, oh, okay, I'll use this because I want to use Pikachu, type of thing, right? And in turn, that will help me learn how to use Pikachu so I can better myself to actually build and get better at that versus me failing multiple times with it and eventually, figuring it out. Obviously, there's pros and cons to each side.
And you're talking about two different skill sets entirely at the same time. Like, and this applies to Pokemon, and most definitely applies to card games as well. Like in card games, you just say you have good builders, and then you have good pilots. You can have a very, very good pilot who just doesn't know how to deck build. He just cannot deck build for the life of him. But if you give him a solid deck, he'll make all the right decisions, he'll make all the right reads, and he'll pilot it extremely well, And the opposite, there could be like a very good theory crafter, deck builder, that could just think of these crazy synergies and these exact distributions to minimize all the variance going against you for like a deck. But then he kind of maybe gets a little bit nervous when he plays. He gets ladder anxiety, or he just doesn't react well. It's different traits, different skills, and you can be good at one, you can be good at both of them, but you can be bad at one of them too. And one doesn't, being good at one doesn't necessarily mean you're good at the other one, right? But it's not. It's also part of the whole. I don't know. I think it's important to note that, right? Because not because everybody automatically assumes that if you can't deck build or if you can't build teams, then you're a bad player, and that's just incorrect. That's wrong. That's false.
Now that Joey kind of brought it up, though, I see that there is the overlap is in the draft format for both Magic and Pokemon. I think kind of have some similarities in that regard, where you kind of have to know how to build and play to be successful in either. Do you think one skill set that is more valuable than another in terms of the drafting?
Draft. So in Pokemon, I think building is for sure, right? Because in Pokemon draft, you see the Pokemon your opponent can use, period, right? This is they're over 800 Pokemon. They can't use all those. They can only use their 9, right? Their 10, their 11. Yeah. So I do think being able to build a team that deals with all theirs to the point where it pilots itself is more important. Now, in terms of Magic, I'm not sure. And obviously you can disagree, Mogwai, as well, in terms of Pokemon.
No, I mean, I agree, unless, the coach themselves have a pretty extensive what was it called? The front office, or the
yeah, I mean, that's what basically for those listening, front office is just people that help them build, help them test, help them do that.
I never had that personally, because I that's like the part that I enjoyed the most.
Yeah, it takes away from what you love.
I loved like prepping. Like that was my favorite part of being a part of like draft leagues personally, was just the building aspect, especially countering. Also try to anticipate as well what they were going to bring and counter that as well. Like there was some serious mind games going on, and overall it was very thrilling for me. I'd say, well, on paper they're very similar. Like we're both Pokemon draft format and the Magic draft format. They're actually not, because like you mentioned, Joey. In the Pokemon draft format, what your opponents have, and not only for each week and every matchup you're going into, but also during the draft process itself.
Yes.
So this also matters for your draft picks, what others are picking. If you see somebody going, some players going for a specific strategy, and then you can resort to a specific Pokemon that can adapt well and kind of like punish that, right? And that doesn't really exist in the Magic draft format. I'm actually not I have very little interest in limited in Magic, because I like it, to just have as a format to play with friends physically, like on a Friday night or whatever. But otherwise, to me, it's just quite simply improvised deck building, and I'd rather play a full-on, optimized deck list.
Do you prefer in terms of Magic?
I play standard. I play almost exclusively standard.
Exclusively?
Yes.
My problem with standard, and this isn't really going into anything, we're not going to segue into something here, but my problem with standard is that it feels very limited in terms of, because I mostly play a lot of modern. So going from that toolbox to like more of a limited, like it's like going from a chainsaw to like a handsaw in some ways, because
and I know what you mean, but at the same time, what I really like about the standard format is that it's way less broken in a way. Like it's also like, I don't know, the thing about me with modern is that it's not supported, first of all, with Magic the Gathering Arena, which is where I mainly focus, right? Absolutely. And it's a good environment for people who have been playing Magic, for many years and such, right? But I'm a kind of I like to approach things, competitively, right? And the best way for me to do so is just focus on standard, because you may think it's limited, but there's always every 3 months there's a new expansion, and in 3 months I have the time to build all sorts of different decks, and I even like built a very competitive Abzan list, like a few days ago, basically like a week ago, and the new expansion is about to hit. So even this far up in the season, so let's call it that. I also managed to build a competitive deck list up to that point. Yeah, it's more obviously it's more limited, but it's not. I don't know. I think Magic the Gathering gives you the opportunity to just kind of like build all sorts of different strategies. Like it's one of the main selling points about it.
For people that are listening and probably joining,
yeah, I was about to ask.
The difference here between standard and modern, and maybe he can help me in explaining. In standard, there's a rotating list of cards that every time a new set comes out, one rotates out and the new one rotates in. So I would compare it, I think, to a new generation being added almost, but it's hard to really make a direct comparison to Pokemon.
So let me ask what I was going to ask then, and then maybe that'll help explain it. So is what you're saying that standard is limited because X amount of cards in this example are either so good or just good at what they do that you're not able to use other things that you want to? Or
no. He's saying it's limited because in standard, you basically have a few sets. It's like a good way to like put it in perspective is imagine if you had Pokemon, if you had a format in which basically at a certain point, generations 1, 2, and 3 were rotated out because there were too many generations introduced.
If you could only play with the most recent 3 generations of
exactly.
Pokemon, well, modern would be more like if you could play with almost all of them. And,
exactly. Which is why I say modern can actually be the more broken one, because in modern, the more cards you add onto the game, the more difficult it is.
What would actually be kind of a good comparison here is the Let's Go meta is because you're limited to just the Gen 1 Pokemon, right?
Yes.
So, like in that, like it kind of it gets to be not as challenging.
But both formats are supported by Wizards of the Coast, right? Like competitively speaking, though standard would be considered like the main format, right? Because it's also more relevant to them because it's always featuring like the newest expansions, basically. But both of them, some people exclusively play modern, some people play both.
Yeah, it really depends on what you're looking for and what drew you into Magic. Because for me, it
also depends on your pocket too. Because modern ain't cheap, buddy. Modern ain't cheap.
The shock lands,
you need some
fetch land.
You need some savings for that.
The lands alone are just so much. It's ridiculous.
I don't know. And hey, I'm a degenerate spender when it comes to card games, but even I look at modern, I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, is it really worth it? Like I was like trying to do a budget modern, and I was like, well, the obvious way to go here is burn. And then I looked at the mana base that you need to just the lands. I was like, that's like $500 just in lands. And then I need like 4 goblin guides that are like $25 a piece. So I was like, well, maybe I'll hold off. Maybe standard is the way for right now.
I like standard because it's always the rotation system keeps it fresh. You have enough time for a standard metagame to not only develop but solidify and kind of like stay, and then you can try to like adapt to it and such. But eventually the oldest set gets rotated out and a new one comes in, and it gets really exciting all over again, right? And I don't know, I like it. I like the rotation system, and I like the timing of it as well. I think it flows pretty well personally. I enjoy it.
Right.
Okay, so in terms of like Magic and Pokemon and just strategy games in general, what I was talking with Key before, I was comparing what you need to do, and Key brought up. So in Pokemon, the way I related them was your 6 Pokemon are your 6 cards, right? And your opponent has their own 6 cards, right? And in every card game, as far as I know, there is an aspect of luck, which is drawing the right cards. Or things like that, or getting the right cards. And obviously you have ways of influencing that, but Pokemon also has their own aspect of luck, right? But the end game goal is still the same, right? I want my opponent's 6 cards to be gone, basically, whereas I have enough cards, even 1 card left to win. So that's how I was like comparing them in terms of strategy, right? And when we talked about strategy versus decision making, so strategy is, a plan or of action or policy designed to achieve a major overall aim, whereas decision making is more so. So how we talk about strategy is how do you say it, Key? I know decision making is more so based on like what your opponent can do.
The decision you make doesn't really hold any value until you know the reaction your opponent is going to have to that decision, and then the value of that decision is weighted as opposed to theirs. Basically, the success of your actions it depends on how your opponent responds to your action. So there's an interactive aspect of strategy in regard and as opposed to decision making.
So
making a decision is just something you can do without having to take anything else into account. Like if you have a play that's 100% of the time, you're just making the decision. Whereas if there's a play that works, let's put it in a 50-50 scenario, then your decision doesn't matter as much as how your opponent reacts, because it could either be a good play or the worst play. And
because it's a 50-50, right? So again, just to recount that, basically decision making is more so based on like your opponent's decisions matter in terms of that, whereas a strategy could be it's like outside of gaming itself too, right? Like I can have
it's like a global plan, right?
Yes,
like a global idea. It's like when it's like, for example, when you're starting off one of your showdown lives and you get into a match and you're always like you look at your Pokemon and you always do this thing. You're like, okay, this guy cleans house. As long as I get rid of this and weaken that and set up rocks, this guy cleans his team.
So it's an overall plan.
So that's your overall global strategy. It's like I don't know how I'm gonna get there. I need to make, and that's where the decisions come in. Like I need to, depending on what my opponent does, I need to make it so that I reach this point in which this guy clears his team. You have an idea, you have a global strategy, a global plan, but then you kind of take it piece by piece, right?
Yeah, I guess you start to apply it based on how your opponent actually reacts,
because you can't predict exactly what they're going to do. So I think in card games it applies. It definitely applies. Obviously, if you're playing like a player with counter spells, you're not, certain players will counter certain spells and certain players won't. So it's a lot about feeling out, and I guess it.
Right. That feeling
I can see similarities.
I described it as the confidence game, and where you play out a signal to test what your opponent is apt to do in that scenario.
Yeah.
Like my example for Magic would be if I leave mana open in blue and I watch how your turn plays out, and you just play spells just willy-nilly, you make all the plays you were going to make anyway without taking that into account, then I know that you're not really counting on, or you're not playing on an axis that takes into account that I might have a counter spell in hand.
I think something that
in the future that I can play my counter spells on your big creatures, because you're not super well prepared for it from what I can see.
Yeah. I think like both games, basically, when it comes to decision, it revolves around the concept of resource management. Like both games share that. Both Pokemon and Magic. It's about managing your resources. It's about in Pokemon, your resource is mainly your health in every single one of your Pokemon. Like you have to manage that.
Yeah, if you lose your 6 Pokemon, you lose.
Exactly. So that is your main resource. Even like in a lot of instances, just keeping a tiny bit of health or making sure that your Pokemon like survives to one more rock entry can mean the difference between a winner or a loss, because you can use that fodder as a way, to bring something else in. In Magic, resources obviously revolve around, it's a card game, so it's the cards, right? So a lot of times you have a specific answer to something, or a card that just does something quite impactful, and you hold on to it. until one of the greatest examples is for when you utilize something like duress, right? Duress has been a card in Magic ever since the beginning of Magic, ever since like there was like that old school Nicol Bolas art. Duress. I'm gonna explain. Duress is basically a black spell. It is a sorcery that costs 1 mana, which means you can play it turn 1. And what Duress does is it reveals your opponent's hand. And then you can choose.
Oh, so it's basically like a team preview almost.
Yes, it's like a team preview. It's like you get to see your opponent's hand, and you get to discard a non-creature, non-land card from or a non-creature spell, basically from their hand. So sometimes you don't find a non-creature spell, but the information that the rest gives you
literally have their entire hand.
Yeah, even though that's not as relevant as a team preview, because obviously from that point onwards,
they can't have any of the Pokemon. Yes, exactly.
Exactly. They're still drawing cards, right? But I have a lot of games in which, because I love, playing the color black, and I love discard cards, and I love the rest, right? And one of the things is like the rest giving me information as to what my opponent has, obviously makes my resource management easier, right? And it also... It's one of those things that, because I'm thinking about a game that I had, that I on my stream very recently, which I held on to a card for like an obscene amount of time until I finally played it to counter a certain card that my opponent was preserving the entire game. And it's one of those cases where I could have used that card like way earlier in the game, right? And that's where like the whole aspect of resource management enters, right? And I think it applies to both games, like different things. Like we're talking cards and health, but at the end of the day, it's the same. Like it's just basically knowing when to time it, knowing when to conserve, and that's how games generally play out a lot of times. And
I think that's really interesting too, because that's a term, like obviously that just seeing their cards or what they have can, you who is experienced might just be able to figure out what type of deck they're running, period, right?
Yeah.
Based on those cards. I'll use the example of Yu-Gi-Oh! At a time there was this deck called Dino Rabbits, which had Rescue Rabbit and Dinosaur cards. And so if I use, whatever form of Yu-Gi-Oh! That lets me see their card, their hands, and I see a Rescue Rabbit in their hand, and I see some dinosaur cards, I can automatically adjust my game plan, my strategy, and make it even better, right? Because a strategy is, as you said, like a whole broad, high-level plan, right, to achieve your goal that's not based on what your opponent does, turn per turn basis, right? It's just an overall game plan, I would say. But being able to know what they have as well just lets me further enforce my game plan, right? It just makes make it all compact. I hope I'm explaining that right, Keith.
In Pokemon, like for example, the hand wouldn't be the Pokemon per se. The hand would be the movesets.
Yeah.
But if you could enter into a match and you could automatically learn all their movesets, that is a huge.
At that point, you're literally playing to switch. Like, yeah.
Like you know exactly, like they can't surprise you with any sort of like special coverage move. It's the same. Like I think so. Yeah, it really affects your decision making. But I don't know. I think it's important to look at these things and just kind of like understand, because when you're going into a game, at the end of the day, you're just trying to. Yeah, that's what strategy games are, right? Trying to outsmart your opponent and trying to like utilize your resources better, right?
Yeah,
and I think
decision making is just a huge thing, right? Unless it's like let's say I'll go just one more time to strategy before we keep going with this, but to an extreme example, like an OTK, so a 1-turn kill, right, where my deck is designed to win turn 1 in a turn, and or in 1 turn, so it's less about what my opponent does at all, and more so about me getting the right card and just playing it to let me keep getting the card, to get me get out there and basically win the game right there, right? So that would be, I think, one of the most extreme suggestion or like examples of strategy versus obviously decision making, which a whole bunch of strategy games obviously imply. Kate, did you want to talk about simultaneous versus sequential games?
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. Basically, while Pokemon and Magic have a lot of similarities in terms of the strategies you can apply and the strategic like principles that work for both, there's a big difference in how you can apply those strategies in that they're two different games. Pokemon is a simultaneous game and meaning that you're both making your decisions at the same time without the knowledge of what the other one's choosing, and where Magic can be played more as a sequential game where you can react to what your opponent just did in the turn before. And both of them have elements of both simultaneous and sequential to some degree, but I think for the most part, then that could be said about both of them. So, like, an aspect of simultaneous strategy in Magic would be that you have spells with flash or instant speed spells and things. So, but
even that technically isn't simultaneous though, because it's always reacting to something. Like you can't play in Magic, you can't like play two cards at the same time ever.
Right,
basically,
yeah,
it's always one reacting to the other, and that's very different from Pokemon. That's true, because in Pokemon it's just like both click on a move.
Yeah, I have my move that
right.
turn. You have your move
Exactly.
at the exact same time.
So,
Exactly.
and basically in a sequential game, there's often a time where there's a best move you can make no matter what your opponent is going to do in the next turn. Would you agree with that? First,
Coming in. Sorry.
in a sequential game,
Yeah.
basically there's oftentimes in a sequential game a move that you can make that will always be the best move you can make, regardless of what your opponent does. Is that agreeable?
In a sequential game, there's always a better move that you can go for.
Or like
There's
best-
often a best possible move.
A best possible move.
Like
It's a sequential game. You're saying basically like in Magic, so there's always a
Right, and
because
for the basically for an example of a sequential game on a lower scale without as much interaction would be like chess, or chess is basically the go-to premier sequential game that you can think of. There's oftentimes a move that isn't immediately punishable, and it benefits you to go for
in chess, yes, definitely. But in like the problem is in Magic, you don't have knowledge.
Right, there's that's like, the element of simultaneous.
Exactly, not knowing. That's why like maybe in a vacuum, yes, there is always one, but you like being potentially aware of it, and because you don't have the knowledge of your opponent's hand, and your opponent can interact with whatever you do immediately, it's hard to say put a definite on that. Like I don't know, it's but I know what you mean though. Yeah, like for example, I mean, I'm not a chess player, right? But in chess there should always be an absolute like best move to go for, right? It's not a game. It has absolutely no variance whatsoever. Chess is chess. Like chess is.
Key has an example of football as well. I think you should tell that example, Key, to like the people out there that might not like understand chess. But you can say it, dude.
Well, I don't. How familiar are you with American football? First of all.
American football. Sorry, Mogwai.
I know. I lived in America for like 4 years and had got no knowledge of American football whatsoever. But I've watched shows and stuff. I know how it goes.
Basically,
big people tackle each other and stuff. Yeah.
In a sequential game, the philosophy that I think you can look at is to look forward in the game and then reason backward. And because of the nature of you always having a best play, it kind of works better than if you tried the same thing in a simultaneous game. Well, what I mean by that is that this football example is like basically a scenario where one team is down by 2 touchdowns. This is more for the audience if you don't understand football, I guess.
Yeah.
But at one team will be down by 2 touchdowns, and if their goal is to win the game outright, then they know that they have to make at least 1 2-point conversion after the score. So they can either tie the game and go into overtime. Is that what it's even called in football? I'm not sure.
I'm not 100% actually.
You guys are the Americans, but sure.
I'd rather play.
But so they can either go for the 1-point conversion point afterwards by kicking it and then tie it to go into the extra time.
It is overtime.
Or they can go for 1 2-point conversion where if they get 1 and the extra point of another after the other touchdown, then they can just take the victory outright.
Yeah. So in that scenario,
if you know you're always going to go for at least one 2-point conversion, then it's best to go for that 2-point conversion on the first touchdown, because then you already know the results.
Yeah, at worst you'll tie the game if you score. That's the big thing too. But obviously, the additional thing, which makes it the best possible, is you can get an additional point on top of that and win the game. So that example is in terms of best possible play, where you're able to. The best possible play isn't to go for the one that ties and make you play more, but to potentially win, because you can still win or at least tie off of it, right? So one is tie and one is tie or win off that move.
So basically, what you're trying to apply, like this point, like coming back to like card games and Pokemon, like what you're saying is that, for example, in a card game, because this is a sequential game, and taking into account, for example, that we can see each other's hands, there's always going to be a best line of play, because my play will go first, or will happen on itself alone, and then my opponent will react to that. Where on the other hand, if you're playing Pokemon, because both players are making the same decision, a different, like some, you reach a lot of scenarios in which it becomes a 50-50 in a way, right? Like you can technically call something a correct play, but your opponent can expect that to happen, but then react accordingly, and then you enter like this sort of like mind game, right? So there's not like necessarily always like
there's not 100%. There's not usually 100%.
The best possible play just does not exist.
The literal best possible play in Pokemon is only 96% anyway, because there's a 4% chance to crit. Like even that, like, right? If you put yourself, let's say that, well, that's an extreme, because you could obviously make it so crits might not matter. But if you're getting crit every turn and you're missing every move, right? Like it always.
In game theory, you would have one play that is going to work out most of the time if you take into account your opponent's plays, and that would be your Nash equilibrium, I think. Don't test me on it too much if you are familiar with game theory. I think I have the concept down here. That would be your Nash equilibrium, and outside of that equilibrium, there is a play that would also benefit you more than that, but it comes with the risk of them picking a move they were less likely to pick, and it makes it more punishable in that regard.
And in Pokemon, we'd call that probably high risk, high reward type of thing.
Yeah. Like, I mean, the whole thing about the nature of like competitive Pokemon too is it's also like really about like reading the opponent. So I think like if you're facing a specific player who that really comes into play as well, because certain players have certain tendency, right? Like that's like one of the things, like looking back into like my own my league days, right? Like when I played, I was pretty successful. Like I did pretty well in the tournaments I was in, like in the leagues. But there was this one player who always who had my number. And that's because he played very differently to the vast majority of people that I faced, and that's 6-foot Hacks. He always, because I was in an environment where people would make certain switches, and I could very easily predict my opponents as to what they were going to do every single time. So I played a little bit aggressively at times, and he was kind of like the opposite of that, and he read me, and it was because of like the player that I was, that I just whenever I faced him, he was like my kryptonite. Like he would always
that was also a mental game type of thing too.
Yeah, exactly. It's because we knew each other. It's because he knew how I played. He studied me. He got and that's something that it happens in Pokemon, but doesn't necessarily happen in Magic the Gathering, for example.
Right.
Like that's where the two games really become quite different, I think, because we talk resource management, which is applied to both, but the mental games really make Pokemon
huge aspect of Pokemon.
It's a huge aspect of the game.
Would you say some of the reason behind how he was able to predict you so consistently was would you say that you have a tendency to strategize on the same level in each game, by which I mean, like, if you're predicting them to make a certain move, then you predict in one level what would be their best play, and then you react to that, but then what they do is reacting to that play that they expect you to make in reaction to the other play.
I did that. Okay, so I did this more in the league format because honestly, like, people. Okay, so there's a lot of factors that go into when you look at the mental aspect of Pokemon, right? And how these decisions of like making the obvious play versus not making the obvious play like weigh in. One of the things is that honestly, in a lot of these leagues that I was a part of, a rather considerable portion of the player base was perhaps not as good, not as competitive, as I was, for example, or something like somebody like Joey was, So these I kind of adapted to my environment, and I knew everybody had a very similar pattern because of this. So people would always make the obvious correct play. And when somebody always makes the obvious correct play, I always made these aggressive double switch-ins. I would go with the EQ with MegaMogwai when they had a flyer in, because I knew they were bringing the steel type. It's like all these things were easy for me to do because I was in a specific environment and I knew how people were going to behave. I knew that people were going to be nervous because you only play like once a week and it's all on that. So that adds extra pressure, which makes people play safer. And all these things I took them into account. Like when I did my preparation, I was like, I thought about the guy I was facing. I was like, yeah, he's not gonna do this. He's not gonna do that. He's gonna be too nervous. He doesn't want to lose his game. He doesn't want to do that because you have to upload these games on YouTube every week as well. So all these things.
I mean, that's a big thing.
Yeah. So this matters. This all matters. Like this all actually like came into fruition.
For sure. So okay. So like here's my follow up question to that, and then I'll talk a little bit about it. Now, did that mean when you played people who you were, let's just say can I just say you outclassed them? Can I just say that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
So
you're allowed to say
humility.
Okay. Right. So let's say when you played people you outclassed, did you play more on a turn by turn basis than as thinking? So the Flygon versus MegaMogwai, right? Because we actually had that matchup. I remember the Flygon versus MegaMogwai, right? If you're thinking you can EQ, were you thinking about if Flygon stayed in an EQ? Let's say your MegaMogwai's at 40%, right? So that means Earthquake knocks it out. You weren't thinking about MegaMogwai going down there at all, but you were more so thinking your opponent would make in your head, the play to switch, right? To switch out the action.
It was a mix of two things. Because I was also nervous in games, right? So I also these emotions affected me too. And I also, I always played with my lineup's health, my resource, right? In mind, right? If I had a very, very valuable Pokemon, I would not risk him. I would make certain aggressive calls, but and you obviously know this better than me. Like in Pokemon, there's some aggressive calls that you can make that don't have as much of a risk factor onto them. And it's just kind of like setting your foot down on the table and being like, okay, I'm taking control of this match, but it's not a sort of like, oh, I'm risking it all on this. I could lose my very valuable win condition with this. No, it's obviously like I would acknowledge. A lot of times I would go for the safe play just because, and I would always that's why I would always aim to draft very efficient wall breakers so that I would have to like predict.
Yeah, Pokemon that even if you Pokemon that even if you, let's say, weren't playing the best that day, if this Pokemon has over 500 attack, it's always going to do damage.
Yeah, that's why I loved my Reckless Embor. It was a great pick in my opinion because it was low tier and it hit like a fucking nuke. So
to go on from that, right? Yeah. So I would argue that in the case that Leo 6 Hacks was able to beat, would you argue that, or would you say, and if looking back at it now, that you were making the high risk plays that didn't always have the best reward, right? Because in Pokemon, I think the best moves are low risk, low to medium risk, good to high reward, right? Those are what people would assume are the best moves.
That's
right?
what I would call the Nash equilibrium.
Exactly.
Back to game theory.
So in that, exactly. And so in that scenario, right, where you would play him, if you got the play wrong, it would put you in a losing situation, right?
Yes.
But a lot of that had to do with the mental game as well. That's a really interesting aspect of Pokemon as well. Like you want to always try and go for it. And this is something this is hard as well. I find myself still struggling with it to this day. And good players like Janvad still find themselves struggling with it to this day as well, because they might give their opponent either too much credit or they might feel their opponent plays a certain way and they'll either react to it or make a play that could lose them the game. Or that's why I always feel like this, like if you have a good matchup, and let's say for those that are watching that actually don't know about Pokemon or understand matchup in general, let's say I am an army of cats and my opponent is an army of mice. Okay, that's the easiest thing. That's the easiest matchup I can way to turn. Right, cats clearly outclass the mice. Right, but the mice they have guns. Okay, so they're gonna use. So the mice they'll die, but they're gonna play it more aggressively in a sense because they have to. Whereas the cats can kind of play safely. But the mice might be able to capitalize on that.
Right. Okay. I see
because they have guns.
Yeah, exactly.
Mice with guns. Yes.
Okay, I'm just trying to.
No, it's the classic mice with guns scenario.
I'm just trying to explain to people who don't know Pokemon or Magic
you there for a second.
or matchup at all, who don't know matchup at all. Basically,
yeah, no. But I like. Yeah, you're making a lot of sense though, despite the gunned mice aspect. Yeah, no, it's all about and like, for example, with going back to Leo, like he was like the one player that I couldn't really read, and it kind of tilted me to play against him because I was expecting. I didn't even risk it as much, but he would basically play more aggressively than I did. He just went. Like Leo was like super like.
So
I would take the like we talked earlier, like the certain risk or certain calls, but that wouldn't be as risky. But Leo just kind of like hey, I'm gonna flip a coin, and if you don't call
this, a level of confidence that you were gonna make
he was fearless. He just did not care.
Now, do you feel like it? Because in a sense, you said that he was playing aggressive.
Yeah.
But let's say you had the best possible, like a quote unquote best possible play, because we already talked about how that doesn't always exist, right? But if you had a play that that obviously did not care about what he did, like you could switch into the Pokemon he was going into, even if he double switch, you could switch into that Pokemon, like. Do you feel that your level of nerves or the mental game prior to going in, because you're like, oh man, this is Leo, he's already beating me all the time. Do you feel like that would have still made you make the certain play like that you did? Like basically,
not that it would have. It definitely factored.
Yeah,
for sure.
So
like I'm not gonna tell you that he just beat me because he predicted. No, I also because of the mental tilt, because that was one of my weaknesses too. Like as a player, I mean, and in general, like I'm a person, I'm pretty level headed, and I'm pretty consistent at whatever game I dive into. But I'm also, I guess I'm Spanish, I'm Latino. I have my blood boils hot, and I lose my cool easily, and I tilt.
And that makes you lose sight, right?
Yeah, so, that makes me make unnecessary risks.
Exactly.
Miss out, and all these factored in for sure. Like,
I'm just gonna go off that real quick, just to give people a little tip, because this is something I've been doing in tournaments too. Because sometimes, if, like for example, I get crit, which is again for those that might not understand Pokemon or anything, it's a 4% chance that my opponent gets off more damage than they're supposed to that turn. Right? That's the best way to describe it. 4% chance my opponent gets off more damage than they're supposed to. And sometimes it might cost me, a member of my team. So one of the things I do, especially when you're in the moment of it, is at team preview, I actually started writing notes down, right? So that way I keep my pieces alive. That way, even if the heat of the battle, right, something happens, I don't lose my cool and lose sight of my overall game plan to win, right? And these notes would help me in terms of that. Like I fought somebody who's beating me all the time, right? And I was able to overcome them because instead of losing my cool, because the mental game already had me prior to it, I just looked to my notes and saw what I wrote down at preview. And I was like, okay, this is the game plan. Let me stick to it. Doesn't matter if they keep lucking me. This is what I'm going to do. I have to stick to this. I can't choose to flip a switch and potentially throw the game on that turn because of the mental game and the reactionary based on what's happening there. So I do think that
whether it's by writing down or any other mechanism you have, like being able to control your emotions throughout a competitive game, when regardless of the strategy game you're doing, is an important asset, and it really is another trait that a player can have. And like I said, that's definitely like something that I'm working on to this day.
Yeah,
but it's important. It's important. Like not only are we talking about a person who's like really good at decision making, a fast decision maker, or somebody who has a very good global strategy view in general. Like it's also somebody who can adapt to just frustration and not let it take over. And these things are also important. And like that's I don't know. That's what I love about this. Applies not only to like strategic gaming, but it applies to any sort of like competitive thing you do, and I think it's important. I don't know.
So, basically, my thoughts on bringing it back to Leo's his grip hold over you in these competitive scenarios. I want to keep linking it back to just the level that you're both playing on. I feel like he has tuned in to what level you are apt to predict on, and there's definitely a sweet spot where you want to predict. Like you could certainly play out in your head 5 steps ahead, but it's never very often the strategic like advantage for you to play it out that far, because if you're thinking the 5th level, that play only really works if they're playing on the 4th level. Because if you're making a 5th level play and they're making a 1st level play, then your play just looks like complete ridiculous. No one can really make sense of what it is. Yeah. So if he finds that you're most often predicting on the 3rd level ahead, then he predicts on the 4th level ahead, then he always has that over you.
Advantage.
Yeah, that's the great way to summarize what happened, basically.
It's so cool too, because I'll take my own personal tournament experience as well, just for this recent Smoke on Premier League. So it's SBL, it's a tournament. We play. I played RU, which is a tier, whatever. I played RU. So going back a year or two, I won the RU Open versus this guy named Welio. And when I played Welio, I used Xatu both games. And the first, if you guys don't know, Xatu basically is a tricky Pokemon to play around just because it bounces back things, right? I'm just gonna keep it at that. So in the first game that I played him, in the first game I played him, I used Xatu very aggressively. I always brought it in on the rocker. No. I used it very aggressively in a sense that I didn't bring it in. So like I would, if he brings out a Pokemon that threatens it, I would always attack what's in front of it, right? Because he's going to be scared to set up his rocks because of the magic bounce, right? He's going to be scared to set up his hazards or whatever he has to do because of magic bounce. In the second game I played him, I played Xatu. In a sense, I always brought it in, because the first game that I played him, I played Xatu a specific way, so I changed it up in the second one, and it obviously worked out for me. So I won the RU Open. Now fast forward 2 years, I played him again in SPL finals in RU, and I brought Xatu because Xatu, from what I saw, had some real estate in his head, right? And that's the way I'm gonna say it, right? We've already played in a high stakes situation like that, and I figured the best way to do it is to bring back something that he's already had trouble. Like I mixed it up every single time I used it. And long story short, I was able to. He had Sticky Web, and he was not able to get them up with me. I even knocked out his Sticky Webber turn 2 because I had Xatu in the back. He was so scared about it. He kept attacking. So
would you say that the way you used Xatu in that scenario was that you played the Xatu on a different level each time, so he didn't know when it was coming in?
Exactly. I kept shaking it up.
Basically,
but that had to do with his knowledge. That had to do with his level of knowledge, because I knew it.
This is one of the things like that in my eyes like turns competitive Pokemon into kind of like a double-edged sword in a way, like this trait of like the mental games, right? Because it's really it's fascinating, like when it comes to I guess closed door competitive environments, like for example a league, or the high stake tournaments like the SPL and such. But when it comes to, it can also translate into a rather frustrating laddering experience as well, because a lot of times you're running into people who, don't know who they are, and sometimes they do things that just make no sense.
No sense. Catch you off guard, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's I don't know. I think it's interesting.
I had a point of discussion here about injecting randomness to reach your advantage, and that's basically what that goes into. Is that if you don't know what level your opponent's playing on, you can kind of just make a play at random, just to capitalize just by chance on whatever it is they're doing. Yeah.
Even just throwing,
it's something that they're not accounting for in their strategy.
Yeah, for sure.
We've all at some point in our lives have ran ladder opponent, and they just had this line of like sequencing that made no sense whatsoever, but it turned out to work out perfectly for them. And it's incredibly frustrating. Yeah, that's happened to everybody.
I know.
And whether that's part of their strategy to inject randomness, or it's just due to the fact that they don't really know what you're going to do. So they
yeah.
like they're able to take advantage of your strategic thinking in that way. Like even newcomers will have that advantage over like veterans in that way
because they'll expect
like, this guy's making plays that are just off the wall. I can't predict what's going on.
Exactly. And the easiest example of that is Landers versus Heatran. All right, I'm the person with Landers, and I have experience in the game. Heatran is 4 times weak to my attack. Right. I also have Scizor. And let's just say I have MegaMogwai and I guess Ferrothorn in the back, right? Your opponent has no way of dealing with both of those Pokemon if they lose Heatran. So me wanting to keep up momentum and take advantage, I won't Earthquake the Heatran because they should value it high enough to the point that they will keep it no matter what, right? Because they otherwise cannot deal with the 2 threats I have in the back.
Right.
So I go for U-turn, whereas the opponent stays in and not only...
Crits you with the Magma Storm.
not even crit me with Magma Storm, but they went for Stealth Rock. Okay, they went for Stealth Rock. So that in that situation, that is what I would argue is a bad play.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out if they're going right or left, and then they jump 20 feet above my head.
Exactly. But then they don't even take advantage in a sense, right? They go for rocks, whereas maybe they're also running a Volcarona on their team. So if I get up rocks, they're forced to defog. And I'm not trying to go too much into Pokemon for again those that might be listening that don't understand it. But in that scenario, never throw away the Heatran, right? But,
Please.
Yeah, but of course that's like injecting that randomness that just throws me off. Right?
I'm just gonna go ahead and say that Leo would have stayed in with Heatran. That goddamn it, oh my god.
And again, in
PTSD.
In that sense too, maybe I did not have to U-turn. If I had 100% switch into whatever they were going in on the Earthquake, it's technically that I made a bad play too. But I would argue that they made the worst play in the long run, right?
Right.
But it got them something out of that turn. Whether it was
and that kind of
I think that's a good like low like super high risk, like low reward source scenario that can translate into
you shouldn't do that. You should not make high risk, low reward plays.
It kind of goes into your end goal and whether your goal is to either win the game or be a better player. Then being a better player, I think, would most often entail doing the play that doesn't risk your the only thing between you and losing. If you make that play too often, then you're going to get taken advantage of.
Yes, your plays will catch up
more often than not.
Your plays will catch up to you. Yes, that's something that Jam always says, that your plays will catch up to you. And I think that also goes into if you aren't ahead, change the game. So let's flip back the scenario, right? And at this point, still Heatran versus Landorus. And this time, because I have such a great matchup, because my 6 are better than my opponent's 6, and they can lose if I basically U-turn and instead of Earthquake, they might be more likely to make that random play. But that was based on the fact that they will lose if I go
if they let you play on the axis that you're playing on,
yes,
and make the play that you expect them to, then they're at a disadvantage because that's what you want.
Exactly. And at that point, I rather risk the game than safely lose. That's how I'll say it.
And
right?
That's what I think a lot of people that view some of your showdown lives don't understand as well. In the comments, why'd you make that? Well, because I was going to lose anyway, and if they somehow went for the wrong play and I
could take advantage
with that choke play, quote unquote, then it puts me back into the game.
Exactly, because when I'm playing, I'm looking, turns ahead, right? I have an end game in mind. So if I see no way of me winning besides my opponent throwing and choking, I'm going to try and play for that, right? Yeah. In that situation, but in that situation though, I wouldn't go for rocks if I was Heatran. I'd go for the offensive play that punishes whatever comes in that situation. So definitely, I think I like the way you put it, Key. If you aren't ahead, change the game for sure. Change up how you play.
Definitely play on a different axis. If the end result looks like you're going to continue being behind, and you don't lose anything by making the bad play and trying to take advantage of a situation.
Yeah, and of course, if I have a great matchup, my decision making should be never giving hold to or never letting go of that great matchup, right? I'm never going to make a play that sacrifices a piece that I need, which is crucial to me winning the game and all that. So, even if that's why that randomness, sometimes you can avoid it even mattering at a point. And I'm not sure if Magic has
I want to
things
bring it
like
all the way back to that, man.
Yeah.
Bring it back to the comparing and contrasting of these games, and basically, I want to know from your standpoint which you think is more important in transitioning from one game to another, and is that your philosophy on strategy? Is that the part that's most important in transitioning, or would you say more so it is just your knowledge of the new game in particular? What do you think that coming into
that's a really good question. Honestly, that's a difficult one to answer, to be completely honest, because obviously, like having knowledge of the game is very key, right?
Yeah, so you
But
don't get surprised or anything.
exactly. But I mean, I've transitioned from games a lot during these past few years, especially like card games. I played Duelist, Gwent. I even played Shadowverse. I played a little bit of Hearthstone, and then Artifact and Magic. So like, obviously, these games share certain core mechanics that make them, all, they're all card games. They're in the same genre, right? So there's certain but at the same time, they also hold quite a few similarities with the likes of competitive Pokemon. And I go back to like resource management. The way I approach these games, like whether it's a card game or a Pokemon or whatever, it's just how can I manage my resources better than my opponent? That's what I guess you would call my quote unquote strategy
Like philosophy.
Yeah. It's I have to make better use of my resources at all times. I have to acknowledge where my advantages are, where my disadvantages are. I have to see all this beforehand, and I have to try to sequence, because then it all becomes about sequencing. And I have to just try to do it better than my opponent, right? And obviously, like, it's very important, and something that I really did learn throughout the time that I was really focusing on Pokemon and Pokemon Showdown, which is such a great tool for like improving competitively, just like the ability to play game after game after game, without having to like run around with a bike. It's like one of the things that I learned from all that is just like seeing the end game, like Joey says, like working. And that's something I learned when I started watching you, like, because at first when I started playing, it's all about like, when a lot of new players, exactly, like turn by turn, it's like, what do I do now? What do I do now? What do I do now? Then all
of a sudden
crap, I lost.
Yeah.
But no, it's like actually like seeing, okay, this is, I have this matchup in front of me. There's these certain things that match up well against me, but I have this tool that can overcome him. How do I make it so that we reach the scenario in which I have this and he doesn't have that, and therefore I win, right? And that's very important, and that applies to, like I said, card games as well. Like it's all about you have certain cards, and you're like, okay, when do I play this? Do I play this now? Do I play it later? When it's going to be more valuable? When it's going to be more impactful? How am I going to overall win this game, right? And I think you can obviously, like, it's a weird question because you have to understand the rules of the game you're getting into, but I think from my own personal perspective, because I have been rather successful, right? Like right now I was playing I've been playing this Warhammer card game that was released like 5 months ago or something like that, and I reached number 4 on the ladder globally. Like I've been wherever I dive into, I try to be as competitive as right. Yeah. I really like climbing ladders, and that's something that I go by. Like it's just like, think about the end game, think about how you're going to win games, and apply that. And I think ultimately that may be an important thing, having that sort of mindset. And like I said, Joey just says it all the time, like thinking about the end game. That's more, because in card games it's harder to like think about an end game specifically, because you're drawing cards all the time. You don't have all your resources available to you from the get-go like in Pokemon, right? But it sort of becomes more about understanding matchups and what cards in your deck will win, basically.
You're gonna have to analyze your win conditions on a turn by turn basis in a card game.
Yeah.
So going back to the question itself, then I would say, as what I got based on what you said, that obviously knowing the rules is important. And I do think that from what you said, certain traits do follow. And obviously, we've seen you excel at multiple games, right? Because of that. But overall knowledge, and because of, you're having that skill, you're able to apply knowledge. But obviously, knowing what's happening helps you determine, like, the end game, right? So go back to what we talked about before. Like, you might play that card that lets you see 5 of your opponent's cards, where if I don't play Magic, or if I don't play Yu-Gi-Oh, if I don't play anything, right, I might see those 5 and I might be able to make a play based on the cards in my hand and the cards in their hand, just because I can read, right? Just because I can read what they can do, right? But that can only take me so far, whereas knowledge itself let me, in your case, maybe know the entire deck and be able to plan accordingly, right? So you think it's a mixture of both then? And then
I think it's also very important, like, and this applies more to games, to just understand the very core aspects,
the fundamentals.
The fundamentals, like, just and this may sound boring, but just look beyond, the art and the card names and all that, and just focus on the numbers. Just read the numbers, and just whenever you look at a card, you're like, okay, what does this card do? This card is worth this amount of mana and has this amount of power and toughness and does this and that, and just think about what that card, how its value is represented in a certain amount of matches. So just try to think like a global sample, be like, okay, how, and just kind of like understand exactly what wins games, how you tend to win games, how games tend to play out, and try to like go as close to the core as you can of like how the entire game of numbers plays out, right? And that will really help you, like, just that just helps tremendously. And I don't know, it's hard to express, it's hard to explain, but it's just
you kind of started to answer the next question I had, which was basically that in employing strategies, what was more your philosophy, and it was in terms of, like, would it be like the more mathematical approach of like employing game theory, and basically what you said about giving it a value and looking at the numbers kind of gives me the idea that it is more of a game theory mathematical approach, with the other
card games is mathematics.
The
card
other option being more of a Sun Tzu Art of War type of approach.
Oh, why not both though?
It could be a mixture of both as well, but in general, a game theory would be the logical left brain process of figuring out how to win, and the Sun Tzu system being more of a creative right brained process.
I think the Sun Tzu one applies more to Pokemon in a way, because you have the simultaneous gameplay, right? Like this, both players are going for the move at the same time, and you have your entire resources available to you from the get-go, right? So it becomes more of like a strategy of, like, like what we mentioned throughout this entire podcast numerous times, like just sequencing, right? And trying to vision a late game. And I think this is definitely an aspect in which, both genres do differ quite a bit, right? Because a good portion of like understanding why a deck is powerful in a card game is understanding the simple, like, the mathematics behind it, right? Like, just if it just comes down to the simple thing that if I have by turn 2, if I have a 3/3 on turn 2 and a 4/4 on turn 3, then I'm just outvaluing you and outmuscling you and outnumbering you, and just doing better than you. So, like, your turn 4 better be something extremely powerful that is able to, balance things out. Otherwise, my deck will superior to yours.
You're just gonna eventually you're just gonna win, especially if you go in that trend. You just doing better than it. So, Key, I don't know if you had anything more in terms of game theory that you wanted to talk going off it, because I feel like Miguel definitely, answered what you said. I kind of wanted to. Oh, you can go. You still have more?
No. He pretty much covered most everything.
So I kind of wanted to relate it back to that what Key said about Leo and having that turn of confidence, and I wanted to relate that back to you when it comes to switching. This is more so you personally, but when it comes to switching the games, as you mentioned, you went from Pokemon to Duelist, Shadowverse, Gwent, Artifact, which we don't talk about, and and eventually Magic. Now I feel like that is not only a sense of confidence in your ability to play games, but also in yourself as a whole, because if from my understanding, this is what you do for a living, right?
Yeah.
So, so your ability to not only change games but focus so much on it, I think just it really just like plays key to who you are as a person, right? And I want to know, is it that just overall confidence that keeps you going? This is just me personally asking. Is that overall confidence that just keeps it doing, or is it like just your love for card games that you know yourself, that you will apply yourself and put hours in? Because that's exactly what you do, right? Like you apply yourself and put just those hours in.
I'm like, I know that I'm not particularly talented. Like I'm not, for example, like by dwelling a lot into like, you know, competitive card gaming, I've met like extremely intelligent people who are just able to, like, for example, have very quick decision making skills that I just know that my brain is not capable of, and that's fine. But I am a very obsessive person, and I just put in the hours. I invest a lot of time, and why I may not be the quickest learner, and I may not be the, you know, the fastest at picking things up, or just or be the best at like adapting to different situations. I invest a lot of time. I put a lot of time. I'm very obsessive over things, and I think that's one of the things that has made me, you know, be able to like win tournaments and do well, and that's what, I don't know. It's not necessarily like self belief. It's just knowing that I do believe that if I put in the hours, and if I put in more hours than this other guy, then I'll eventually surpass him. And that's kind of like
I think
that's my
fair.
approach.
That's good, and just having a level-headed approach. Not even level-headed, but like taking from losses is a big thing too.
Exactly.
A little bit of oh, you can go.
No, yeah. It's just it's important to kind of like I don't know. You know, we all have our limits, but at the same time, the limits are not like set in stone in a way, right? You can just you know, if you want to really do excel at something, then just put in more hours and put in more hours and more hours until you actually do. You know. And
now going off that,
yeah,
and this is more from a geographical standpoint. Do you believe you were able to do this because this is how you make money? This is how you make money, right? Do you believe? Maybe not. You didn't think of this consciously, but like somewhere in your brain, do you think that the reason you were able to do this is because your cost of living is also very low in Spain? So to a point where even if this didn't work out, let's say you spent a month doing a card game, right? Even if, and again, this is just me. I'm not questioning. I'm not trying to downplay anything at all. I'm just just to realize. Do you believe that even if you spend a month playing a game, let's say you sucked at it, right? Let's just say you sucked. You say you sucked at it, and you think it'd be still okay because you'd still be able to play the bills. And because, like again, because the cost of living in Spain is low, right? That's what I'm assuming. It's
like because you started by saying that the cost of living in Spain is very low. I mean, it's definitely not, you know, at the level of like something like New York, for example. Like I will, but we, you know, it's also not. We're not like Poland, you know, like we were. I'd say it's rather medium. You know, like I've definitely I still do, you know, I definitely do worry about, you know, like everybody else, right, about bills and stuff. This whole like YouTube and Twitch thing has been really crazy because realistically speaking, like when I decided to make the transition to do it full time, I would not have made that same decision today because I just wasn't aware of how stable financially I was. You know, I was just kind of like writing it every month, and I had this deal with Counterplay Games. Like I would cover Duelist, and you know they would you know pay me a little bit and such. And I kind of like rode that for a long time, and I wasn't aware of like just how barely I was, you know, scraping by. You know what I mean? Like. So, I obviously like, you know, Spain is not an expensive country, but one of the issues we have here is obviously like, you know, there's not as many job opportunities, right?
Yeah.
But I've definitely been super lucky to be in a position in which, you know, I don't think because now I'm trying, you know, I'm building a life with my girlfriend, right? Because I met her. About a year and a half ago, more or less. And she moved in with me summer last year, and and now we're at a point where we're, because I live with her and with my sister, because I take care of her, her food and everything. But now we're going to move to like a house ourselves and all that,
Nice.
and obviously like it's exciting and both scary at the same time, because this whole like Twitch and YouTube thing,
It's finite, right?
it's the best. Yeah, exactly. It's not. I mean, no job is stable,
Of
but
course.
you got to be realistic and just know that
Like
I'm fully
you could sign a contract to a company for 10 years as long as you
Yeah.
don't do anything stupid. It won't be
exactly. And here it all rides on me. Like I'm the guy on top, right? Like I have no over me. Like I'm just, and that's
for sure. And like,
that's kind of
and the term "you reap what you sow." While it does apply with YouTube, it's not always 100%, man. Something can happen either way.
Exactly.
Like
No, because it's also it also really like us. When you focus on Pokemon, right? I focus on Magic the Gathering.
Sure.
Our livelihood is really quite directly, tapped to that. Like
Yeah.
if all of a sudden people stop playing Pokemon, then you're in trouble. If people stop playing Magic, I'm in
For
trouble.
sure.
I mean, I've migrated like a lot, so
ton.
I've switched how many times? Like at this point, I've done it a lot, and I've
It's
managed
4+.
to.
It's 4+ for sure.
Yeah, and people have always asked me like, how have you managed to like? How are you still doing so well? I have no idea, but it's not something that I take for granted at all. And I'm always like, I'm always like the opposite. I'm always like, tomorrow everything's gonna go to crap. Everybody's gonna like everything's just gonna fall down. I'm gonna have like no viewership.
Wins worlds. Tomorrow sucks.
Yeah.
I think what you have is what me as a content creator and what other content creators should strive to have. Basically, it doesn't matter what you do, what you play, people will follow you. And I've watched all your update videos. I honestly think update videos are the coolest things ever from people. Like I might not watch any of the content, but the update video is like, oh, okay, that's cool. What's going on in your life?
Every YouTuber who I talk to like says the same thing, and I feel the same too. I don't know.
It's like, interesting because you see the person behind that. Yeah, exactly. But basically what you're doing is what I think what we're doing is also what other people should be doing is you want to strive to be this content creator, this influencer that no matter where you put yourself, you will have an audience, right? So even if you're outside vlogging yourself, cleaning the streets, or if you're playing Hangman, right? Competitive Hangman. Key told me some things about that. You're playing competitive Hangman, or you might start doing any game, right? You might just completely switch to Smash, a more technical game, right? But you an audience will follow you because of who you are as a person and also, your skill, right? And they know that when you apply yourself, you get bigger. And obviously at first, like I even looked at your first few Magic videos versus, obviously now, right?
Yeah.
There's a huge difference because
rough,
yeah, exactly. There's a huge difference because at first people were like, oh man, Magic, what is this? Another game. Miguel is switching another game. But eventually they start like, wow, this is interesting. Like I'm sure you'll get comments like, hey, at first, I followed you for Duelers, for Gwen, but now I really like that you're doing this. And it's so interesting. Like I might not even play the game, but your personality and your skill shows, right? And this is what I like about it. So what you're doing is, I think, super cool. And I think you're doing it. You might not know what you're doing, but you're doing it right. You're doing it right.
I really appreciate it, man. Honestly,
that's just my take on it, right? Like
it's yeah, like it's like from my perspective, it's always been it's been rough and scary, right? Like when I covered Artifact, I covered Artifact for a month. I got really invested into it. Like I actually competed in the first ever like broadcasted Artifact tournament, which is like. Yeah. Was supposed to be like this huge thing, Valve was all over it. Obviously, like what was the was Beyond the Summit, I think, were the ones who covered. I don't know, but yeah, this tournament was huge, and I managed to like all these Hearthstone personalities were in it too. Like there were like 120 people, and I placed second. Right, I made it to the finals, and that was at a point I was like, okay, this is my beginning. This is like I really love this game competitively. Like I just. It's Artifact is very complicated as a game, or was, because I think they're redesigning it, but it was also like very rewarding, right? If you were like tryharding at it all the time. And at that point I was like, okay, I was focusing really heavily on YouTube. Like I was making sure I kept the daily uploads, and I just like, they were like, the views were like super low, and I was like, I must be doing something wrong. And I'm like, I'm gonna check other people who are covering this game, and then it's like all of a sudden, like I was like the biggest Artifact YouTuber. Like there was no viewership for it whatsoever, right? And at that point, I was just like, this game has flopped tremendously. And I remember like at the end of 2018, that was a tough time for me, because I wasn't like, I legitimately wasn't sure if I was going to be able to sustain myself. Yeah, I'd switched games before and done well, but in my eyes, I was always like super lucky every time that worked out for me, right? Like, when I did well in Gwent and such, like that just, things worked out. Like that's how it always like plays out in my mind, because it otherwise I feel like you kind of enter a trance in which you're just not, your feet are not on the floor. Basically, you're kind of like, I don't ever want to take things for granted, basically,
for sure.
Because I think that's the one way you just can just make it all like fail. I don't know. It's so when I made I remember I got on a call with a good friend of mine, Merchant, who's also a Magic YouTuber, and we were talking about Artifact, and we were just like shocked that it flopped so hard. And at one point, I remember like it was like New Year's Eve, and I was honestly like quite depressed. I was like, I don't know what to do, and I'm like, you know what, I'm just I've always loved Magic, and I kind of the reason why I didn't stick with it earlier is because I was a caster for Gwent, and I was kind of like, I felt like obliged to continue covering Gwent at that point, even though I wasn't super passionate about it. Honestly, it was an awkward period in my life, basically, professionally speaking, I guess. And then I saw this whole opportunity with Artifact. It was like I thought that was my, perhaps would be nice to be like really focused on that. But then I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna play Magic, and I'm just gonna try to do my best. I'm gonna do daily uploads, and we'll see how things turn out. We'll see if I need to call, Bob.
Yeah,
See if I can figure. But then the expansion was released, and all of a sudden, the views started going up and up and up and up, and then I've been losing subs for like months, and then all of a sudden I gained like 15,000 subscribers, and it was just like, I don't know, I like I said, I consider myself a very fortunate person.
Sure.
Some people see it from the outside and they're like, wow, this guy must be like, super confident and so. No, I'm like the opposite of that, honestly, and it's just like. Things work out in that sense, and this whole YouTube, this well, like this whole YouTube ride, Twitch, this whole content creation life is quite a roller coaster.
For sure,
you're never always on the. There's highs and lows constantly,
yep.
And it's just important to be level-headed and just keep pushing forward. Really.
Yeah, that's it. Like at the end of the day, like you don't know what's going to happen, right? But I always say that there is luck. There's a lot of luck involved, but you also make your own luck. I will have a higher chance of something happening to me if I'm actually uploading versus me giving up and like.
Oh, it's sorry to interrupt, but like I want to preface it.
Go for it.
I was like when I went on like the daily uploads with Magic, I was like, I worked my ass off. Like I never worked the way I did with like YouTube when I like started with Magic. I didn't miss a single daily upload, and every day I had a new original deck. At one point I was making a new deck every day that actually worked too. So I was like I would like sleep very little, and I was like, because I was determined. I was like, you know what, I'm not going down without a fight, and then I always like. And again, you can relate to this. Like, you have to give people a reason to watch you.
Yep.
You can't just like expect people to watch you. You have to give people a reason to watch you. You have a certain niche. You have your own identity, your own thing going on. Embrace it and just push it. I'm some people consider me loud and obnoxious. Others find that entertaining, and I just try to be competitive and entertaining at the same time. And I do my thing and. Consistency, man, just grinding it out. And that's definitely something like YouTube can be very unstable, but it is true. And what you just said about making your own luck, it is true. Like I would not have like revived my channel if I did not like work my ass off every day.
Exactly.
Like, and that obviously that's important to know.
And unfortunately, you know, that doesn't work for everybody. I'm sure there's people out there
Yeah.
that upload all the time and nothing ever happens to them. It is luck, but once you've had like a taste of it, or once, you know, luck finds your way, keep going. That's what it is. You make something out of it, man. Like every day I think I'm blessed, right? I'm fortunate to be in this position that I'm able to do what I want. And obviously, like, you know, I got married last year. This is my second apartment. I don't own two apartments. That'd be pretty cool if I owned two apartments. I rent one out. But this is my second apartment. You know, I live with my wife, and every single time, like going into Sword and Shield, right? The new Pokemon games. Right now, my game plan is stay relevant, keep pushing myself, get better and better, hopefully teach people. And by the time Sword and Shield comes out, you know, ride that as well, right? Till the next game. That's every single time, right? Like for me, Pokemon is my main thing, but I also hope that, and I've been doing it with and again, we're like breaking the wall, but like with the podcast, right? Key, we want this to obviously excel as well. And we want to show, hey, there's a different side to pokeaimMD, to Joey, to Joel Sharon, or whatever, to Joel Matthew Sharon. I'm gonna keep going with that. And then Key, with no name tied to that, but
No name.
no name at the moment. At the moment, but you see, when that boy starts growing, I'm gonna tell you right now, I know his name, but that boy is gonna start calling his name. He's not gonna be Key anymore. At least his persona type of thing. I already know that's gonna happen. But
no, but I like your, like, it's what you, I think you've said several times, you know, when doing these podcasts. I've watched, you know, other ones, obviously, right? Yeah, I had to like inform myself, and I actually, I even got the popcorn for the, you know, the drama filled one with the, you know, oh boy, but yeah, like one thing that I like that you say is like, you know, this is a good opportunity to like kind of like meet the person behind the YouTube channel in a way, and I think that's cool, you know, because a lot of times, especially people who haven't been doing YouTube themselves, they kind of forget, you know, we're human beings, you know? So, and we're people just like them, and with many flaws, and you know, I don't know, it's important, I guess.
You'll see a lot in the comments cool. Whenever somebody tries something new to their channel because they're just tired of making the same content. You'll see people like complaining, why don't you bring this back? Why don't you do X? Well, because I'm a human and it's just not a passion for me anymore. And, you know, if I'm not enjoying it, then you probably aren't going to enjoy it anymore. You know, I can't just, at the end of the day, you know, like you said, these are all just humans making content for free. A lot of they're producing free content for you, so you can't really tell them what to do. Like you're just
it's all about balance. It's about like realizing how YouTube works, how the algorithm works, and being realistic that, you know, it's more likely you're going to develop a larger following if you stick mainly to one game, but also be flexible, be healthy, respect yourself in that sense, and.
Yes.
And you know, like something that I'm doing now a lot is that I just love card games. I'm like obsessed. Like I think about card games like every minute of every day. Like I'm just that guy. And you know, when I get really tired of one, I just, in my off time, I play another one. And I don't know. That's I think.
It's how you are. It's human nature. Like for me, I'm really weird, and I think I'm fortunate to say I don't think I've ever lost passion for Pokemon.
No, you've always loved Pokemon. Like ever since
I can remember.
It's been quite intriguing to me. Like goddamn, you still.
I don't know what it is. Maybe maybe we'll have an episode about like how I feel about myself and Pokemon. But ever since, you know, my youngest memory is being 3 years old playing Pokemon Red when it came out, right? And I remember waking up, and like my parents at some points were maybe strict with when you could watch TV. I don't want to dwell too much into it, but like maybe like when I'm growing up. So if I only have an hour, I'd literally just sit there reading a book, staring in front of the TV, waiting for 10 a.m. for Pokemon to be on, you know, Kids WB or what it is. Like I just have this love for it, right? But not everybody is the same way. And I feel like as content creators, we just hope that especially us that put, I feel like, our personality into it rather than other content creators, and no bashing to them, but I'll take the example of kissing pranks or like social things like that, or even top.
Kissing.
I am. I'm gonna put that. I'm gonna put it there. I'm gonna put that there. right? And we talked about it from Twitter from the last episode as well. But those are people that you're probably subscribed to just because they're doing this particular type of prank, not because you care about them as a person, right? And for us people, the initial thing is, hey, you came in for Pokemon, but ideally you stay because you still love Pokemon just like me, but you love the personality behind it as well, right? And the thing is, like, we didn't make the podcast because I'm tired of Pokemon. No, far from it, man. If I could play Pokemon all day and night, like I've always said, if I could clone myself, and I mean, it'd be unfair to Marlene, but like if I had like one to, be social, one to spend time with my wife, and the one to play Pokemon, I don't know which one I'd even be at that point, right? Like, because and that's tough to say. Like, I love Marlene more than anything, but like Pokemon, it goes like, if we're just putting Marlene in Pokemon, Marlene is there, and then Pokemon is right under, right? In a sense. And obviously family ties with Marlene as well. But like, it's just, I have this love and this passion for it. And again, our hope as content creators, and I know we have fears, we have tons of fears, but we just hope that people just continue to watch us for us. And I think that's like when you do Twitch, for example, I think Twitch is one of the best things you can do because it's getting people to go from your initial platform to another just to watch you, even if it's Pokemon or whatever game you play, right? Magic or at points Gwent and stuff. And then you influence all these people as well. It's so cool. It's scary, but it's cool, right? That's where I'm going with that. I don't want to go too much into me. That's not about me, but yeah.
No, but I agree completely. And like somebody who I've seen, I think has got similar, experience. At least I guess from a larger scale is Shady Penguin, right? Like Shady Penguin was known as the Pokemon guy. Like I remember when I started watching Shady Penguin before I even was a YouTuber myself, and he would like do his 2 videos a day. That is what I say. He would upload two Wi-Fi battles every day, and people just loved it. And then at one point, little by little, he just got burnt out, man. It happens, and he's had, because he had other games he was passionate about throughout his life. Like he loved the Yu-Gi-Oh franchise, the Dragon Ball franchise, and all that. And seeing him like kind of like liberate himself a little bit and pursue that, it was nice to see, because I've obviously, like, I've gone through the
similar thing
myself. Like the thing is, like I said, I stick to one genre, but I do get burnout, and most people do, but it's harder to relate to that when you're just a viewer. And obviously, like, viewers, there's so many different types of viewers, right? There's definitely like a lot of people who leave comments on my videos who are completely
likes also.
Yeah, but a lot of people just don't realize it. I've been on that end too. Like I remember when I was a viewer, like the YouTuber that actually like indirectly encouraged me to like upload and try YouTube out myself was actually Etika, right? And I remember when Etika stopped doing Pokemon, I was like upset at him. I was like, no, I want to watch you play Showdown. Like, what are you doing with these like weird like fighting? Because I never liked Super Smash. I don't like fighting games, right? And when he like started dwelling to that, I was like, no, my Etika, where'd he go? And I was more selfish back then, right? Like I was just a viewer, and I just kind of like didn't realize, just
when you
this perspective, right? And
when you put yourself in the shoes, like you realize it's different. It's
exactly
completely different from what it is. Yeah, I think Etika is a good example as well. Someone who started with something and just changed up his passions and just doing his own thing. Literally, at this point, people watch Etika for Etika. That's it.
Yeah, exactly. Like he's the goals, I guess. In a way.
In terms of
in terms of YouTube, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh, that flew by. What the hell? Look at the time we're at.
Oh my
god. Key, is there anything you want to add?
Not really, man. We covered like,
dude, we covered strategy, and then we covered Mogwai. I loved it. I always say this, man, but like as a summary of the episode. But I really enjoyed this episode.
Is there anything?
Dude, I love it too. I hope I was coherent with the strategy parts. I mean, sometimes I don't know if I express myself properly, but it was fun. It was great.
I think it's great too. You were saying, Key?
Anything? Just in closing, I mean, feels like we pretty much covered every possible aspect of.
I guess. Do you do you have anything coming out, Mogwai, that you want to announce to them, or anything like any closing words in general that you'd like to say?
Oh.
This is your platform now. Just tell them where to
All
find
right.
you. Tell them all that stuff. Obviously, the
I'll
links
go,
will be there.
I'll go on my monologue here a little bit, I guess. So, Bobby, yeah, basically, I'm just some guy with some Spaniard with a Brazil flag in the back who plays card games, and I do so on YouTube and Twitch. I mainly focus on Magic the Gathering, but I do play other stuff as well. And I have, for the time being, retired a little bit from casting events, but yeah, I if you want to check out, if you like Magic the Gathering and all that, then you can go to my channel if you want. In regards to Pokemon, I may have hinted a little bit. I may get back into it. I am a little bit intimidated though, because there's all these Zemus running around. I'm like this old man just shaking his fist at the clouds, just kind of like,
even
my day.
Now, even the
my day, Sandslash was brown, not blue.
Oh,
like,
okay.
what is? But yeah, I mean, eventually I'll try it out, because I do miss. Showdown is also like, it was pretty relaxing for me too as well. It's just such a good tool, like that whole like the team building and stuff. Like I definitely do miss the Pokemon days. I have like really fond memories from the GBA, UCL, all that, and yeah, it was just, in a way, this was like an opportunity for me to, at the same time, get back a little bit, like return a little bit to my past, in a way, right? Like, it's get back in touch with, because I met a lot of really cool people from the Pokemon community. Like I obviously like you, Joey, but also Chimpact, Gator, Shady Penguin, John Pokemon. There's so many people that I met when I was there. Even Swagglip, I don't know where he's now, but I don't know. It's a lot of fond memories, and I hope I get to stay in touch and kind of like reminiscence is how you say it.
Reminisce,
yeah, with some old buddies, because I haven't spoken to them in a while. But just thank you for having me. It's really fun to do, and hopefully we get to catch up soon as well. I'm also glad things are going great for you. Like I know you got married. Like, follow you on Twitter and all that. And yeah, I mean, I see that, and like I'm also like trying to build a life with my girl as well. That's
awesome.
Cool. Nice to see you doing so well, man.
I appreciate it. The same goes back to you, and I hope we are in touch more. Like, not just with Pokemon, but as I mentioned, I do want to play Magic, and a lot of that is because Key plays Magic and Gator plays Magic because he watches you, and all my other friends, Duncan plays Magic. Like it's like, okay, I'll play, like like type of thing. Like I don't feel like
I think you love it, honestly. I mean, you've always been a strategic.
But see, my issue is that if I don't put in the time, I'm not going to get good. Period. Right. So I don't know. I mean, that goes.
You like. I think you're the kind of person you like doing. Like you don't like half-assing something, basically, right? Like if you want to dive into something, you can be good at it. Because I'm that way too. So
yeah, that's just it. But yeah, dude, I appreciate you coming on, guys. His Twitch link, his Twitter link, and his YouTube will be obviously linked down below. And yeah, I don't really have much else to say. Key, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
I mean, if you made it this far in the YouTube, then I'm disappointed. I'm ashamed.
Guys, real talk. I might as well say it now. We said it before, but we don't get paid from it being watched on iTunes and stuff. Yeah, Anchor does have like a little ad, but whatever. The big thing is we obviously the final goal is getting some sponsorships, getting this out there as well. So numbers on those sites are a lot easier to pitch to certain people than YouTube. That's just how it is. But regardless, I appreciate you guys watching. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Lot. Check out Miguel. Follow Key on Twitter. Check him out. The link is down below. And yeah, we'll see you guys. Goodbye, everybody.